Commander Vexith stood on the bridge of the Dominion flagship, his 4 eyes scanning the tactical display with growing unease. The holographic map showed his fleet of 3,000 warships surrounding a single human colony world. By every calculation, by every rule of galactic warfare, this battle was already won. "Status report," he demanded, his voice clicking through his mandibles. "All forces in position, Commander," replied his tactical officer. "The humans have only 47 ships defending the planet. Our victory is certain." Vexith's upper eyes narrowed while his lower one stayed fixed on the display. He had heard those words before. He had spoken those words himself once. That was before he had fought humans. "Do not speak of certainty," Vexith said quietly. "Not against these creatures." The tactical officer, young and eager, tilted his head in confusion. "Commander, we outnumber them 60 to 1. The mathematics are simple." "The mathematics are never simple with humans." Vexith turned away from the display and walked to the observation window. Below, the blue and green world of New Haven hung in space, peaceful and beautiful. Soon it would burn if his masters had their way. "I want all ships to maintain formation. No captain is to break rank for any reason. Do you understand?" "Yes, Commander." But Vexith knew that understanding and believing were different things. His young officers had studied the approved histories. They had learned that the Dominion had conquered 1,200 species across 4 galaxies. They had memorized the tactical doctrines that had never failed in 10,000 years of war. They had not learned to fear. 3 cycles ago, Vexith had commanded a fleet against a human mining station in the outer reaches. He had brought 200 ships against a station defended by 12. The battle should have lasted minutes. It lasted 3 days. The humans had done things that made no sense. They had turned their mining equipment into weapons. They had crashed their own cargo ships into his cruisers. They had sent workers in mining suits to cut holes in his ships with tools meant for asteroids. When his soldiers boarded the station, the humans had flooded entire sections with their own atmosphere, knowing they would die but taking his warriors with them. Vexith had won that battle. He had lost 87 ships and 4,000 soldiers to defeat 12 small craft and 300 miners. His superiors had called it a victory. Vexith called it a warning. Now he watched the human defenders form up around New Haven. Their ships were small compared to his battle cruisers. Their weapons were less powerful. Their shields were weaker. By every measure, they were inferior. But they were human. "Commander," the communication officer spoke up, "we are receiving a transmission from the human flagship." "Show me." The holographic display flickered, and a human face appeared. It was a female, Vexith noted, though he still had trouble telling their genders apart. She had dark skin and darker eyes, and she wore the simple uniform of their military. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force," she said. "I assume you are here to discuss terms of surrender." Vexith's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. "Your surrender, human, yes." Admiral Chen smiled. Vexith did not like that smile. "Actually, I meant yours." The communication officer made a sound of disbelief. The tactical officer actually laughed, but Vexith remained silent. "You have 47 ships," he said carefully. "I have 3,000. "I can count, Commander." The Admiral's smile did not waver. "The question is, can you?" Vexith leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "I mean that numbers are just numbers. Ships are just ships. What matters is what you do with them." She paused. "And humans are very creative about what we do." "Your creativity cannot overcome mathematics." "Maybe not," Admiral Chen agreed. "But it can make mathematics very expensive. How many ships can you afford to lose, Commander? How many soldiers? How many of your young officers who have never seen what humans can do when we're cornered?" Vexith felt something cold move through his body. He did not answer. "I'll tell you what I see," the Admiral continued. I see 3,000 ships crewed by soldiers who think this will be easy. I see a fleet that has followed the same tactics for 10,000 years. I see an enemy that has never lost, which means you have never learned to adapt." She leaned closer to the camera. "I see a commander who knows exactly what I'm talking about. You know nothing of me. I know you survived the mining station at Kepler 9. I know you lost 87 ships to 12. I know you've been warning your superiors about humans ever since, and I know they haven't listened." The smile disappeared from her face. "I'm giving you a chance, Commander. Turn your fleet around. Tell your masters that this world is not worth the cost." "And what cost would that be?" "Everything." The transmission ended. Vexith stood in the silence that followed, aware that every officer on the bridge was watching him. He could feel their doubt, their confusion. They did not understand why their commander was troubled by the words of a doomed enemy. "Commander," the tactical officer said carefully, "surely you do not believe her threats." Vexith turned to face his crew. They were good soldiers, loyal and brave. Most of them would be dead within the day. "I believe," he said slowly, "that we are about to learn why the galaxy fears humans." He returned to his command chair. "All ships advance, but tell every captain to expect the unexpected. Tell them that nothing they see will make sense. Tell them to survive, not to win." The officers exchanged glances but followed his orders. The great fleet began to move, 3,000 warships closing on 47 defenders. Admiral Chen watched the enemy advance from her command center on the UES Unconquered. Around her, officers ran calculations and prepared systems, but there was no panic. There was no fear. There was only quiet determination. "They're coming in standard formation," her tactical officer reported. 3 waves, capital ships in the center, support craft on the flanks. "Predictable," Chen murmured. 10,000 years of success, and they still use the same playbook. "Admiral, our chances of survival are less than 3%. "Survival isn't the goal, Lieutenant." Chen stood and looked around her bridge at the men and women who had volunteered for this mission. "Victory is." She activated the fleet-wide communication channel. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. You know why we're here, you know what we're facing. The enemy has more ships, more guns, more everything that can be counted and measured." She paused. "But they don't have what we have. They don't have creativity. They don't have the willingness to try things that have never been tried. They don't have the human spirit." On 47 ships, thousands of humans listened. "Today we're going to show them why numbers don't matter. Today we're going to teach them to fear. Today we're going to make them remember that you never, ever corner a human." She took a deep breath. "Operation Impossible begins now. All ships execute." The 47 human ships did not form a defensive line. They did not try to hold position. They did not do any of the things that made tactical sense. They scattered. On the Dominion flagship, Vexith watched the human formation dissolve into chaos. His officers cheered, believing the enemy was fleeing in panic. But Vexith saw the pattern in the chaos. He saw ships moving to positions that should have been meaningless but somehow weren't. He saw a trap being built in real time, piece by piece, out of nothing but desperation and imagination. "All ships hold position," he ordered suddenly. "Commander." "Hold position." Vexith gripped his command chair as understanding dawned. "They're not running, there." But it was too late. The first phase of Operation Impossible had already begun. Admiral Chen watched her ship spread across the battlefield like seeds scattered by wind. To the enemy, it looked like chaos. To her, it was the opening move in a game no one else knew how to play. "Phase 1 complete," her tactical officer announced. "All ships in position." "Time to spring the trap." Chen smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Activate the mines." Throughout the space between her fleet and the enemy, 200,000 objects came to life. They were small, barely visible on sensors, and they had been placed days ago by automated drones. The Dominion fleet had scanned for mines, of course. They had found nothing dangerous. That was because the mines were not dangerous, not yet. Commander, the Dominion tactical officer stared at his display. We're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the combat zone. Unknown origin, unknown purpose. Vexith leaned forward. Weapons. No, Commander, they appear to be communication relays. Communication relays. Vexith's mandibles clicked in confusion. Why would they seed the battlefield with communication relays? The answer came seconds later when every relay activated at once and began broadcasting the same signal on every frequency. It was not a message. It was noise. Pure, overwhelming, signal-destroying noise. We've lost fleet communication. The communication officer's voice cracked with panic. All channels are jammed. We cannot contact our other ships. Switch to backup frequencies. They're all jammed, Commander, every single one. Vexith felt the cold in his body spread. Without communication, his fleet was no longer a fleet. It was 3,000 individual ships, each fighting alone. And that was exactly what the humans wanted. In the chaos that followed, the 47 human ships struck like predators. They did not attack the large battle cruisers, which would have been suicide. They attacked the support craft. They attacked the fuel tenders and ammunition carriers and repair ships. They attacked everything that kept a fleet running. And they did it with creativity. Captain Marcus Rivera brought his destroyer alongside a Dominion supply ship and matched its speed perfectly. His crew fired magnetic grapples that attached to the enemy hull, then cut through the metal with plasma torches. They weren't trying to destroy the ship. They were trying to board it. "We're inside," his sergeant reported over the radio. "Enemy crew is confused. They didn't expect us to come to them." "Get to their cargo bay," Rivera ordered. "Find their fuel reserves. And then blow them up from the inside." 2 minutes later, the supply ship exploded. It took 2 nearby frigates with it. Elsewhere in the battle, Commander Lisa Park was executing an even stranger plan. Her frigate was old and slow, outmatched by every enemy ship on the field, so she stopped trying to fight like a warship. "Activate the holographic projectors," she ordered. Her ship was equipped with equipment meant for scientific surveys, not combat. The projectors could create 3-dimensional images that looked real to sensors. Park had spent weeks programming them with a very specific illusion. 100 human warships appeared on the Dominion sensors, bearing down on the enemy flagship. "Commander," the Dominion sensor officer screamed the word. "Massive human reinforcements, 100 ships approaching." Vexith's eyes widened. Where had they come from? How had they been hidden? He turned to give orders, then stopped. Something was wrong. "Scan those ships again," he said slowly. "Commander, we must respond." "Scan them again." The sensor officer obeyed. A moment later his voice came back, confused. "They're not real, they're projections, holograms." But those few seconds of hesitation had cost Vexith dearly. While his attention was on the fake fleet, a real human ship had slipped past his defenses and launched torpedoes at his engine section. The flagship shuddered as explosions tore through its rear compartments. "Damage report. Engines at 40%. We've lost maneuvering capability." Vexith slammed his fist against his chair. One small human frigate had crippled his flagship with a trick that shouldn't have worked. But that was the thing about fighting humans. Nothing should have worked, yet everything did. Across the battlefield, similar stories played out. Human ships used debris as shields. They flew into the blind spots created by the communication jamming. They fired missiles that released clouds of sensor-blocking particles. They rammed enemy ships when their weapons failed. They did everything wrong, and somehow it all worked. 2 hours into the battle, Vexith had lost 600 ships. The humans had lost 11. "This is impossible," the tactical officer whispered. "They cannot be winning the mathematics." "Forget mathematics," Vexith's voice was hollow. "Mathematics cannot account for insanity." Admiral Chen watched the battle unfold with fierce pride. Her people were dying out there. Good men and women, sacrificing themselves for a world most of them had never even visited. But they were taking the enemy with them, at a ratio that should have been impossible. "Admiral," her communications officer spoke up, "we're receiving a transmission from the enemy flagship. They want to talk." Chen nodded. "Put them through." Commander Vexith's face appeared on the screen. He looked older than before, his 4 eyes dimmed with something that might have been exhaustion or might have been shock. "Admiral Chen," he said, "you have made your point." "Have I?" Chen leaned back in her chair. "Because from where I'm sitting you still have over 2,000 ships. I have 36. The math still favors you." "The math?" Vexith made a sound that might have been bitter laughter. "Your people do not fight with math. You fight with madness." "We fight with creativity," Chen corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Vexith shook his head. "I watched one of your ships fly directly into the exhaust port of my carrier. The pilot was still alive when she did it. She was smiling." "Lieutenant Jackson, she was a good pilot." Chen's voice was steady, but her eyes were hard. "She was also a mother. 2 children waiting for her back on Earth. She smiled because she knew she was protecting them." Vexith was silent for a long moment. "How do you fight an enemy like that? How do you defeat someone who treats death as victory?" "You don't," Chen said simply. "You learn to live with us instead." The commander stared at her through the screen, and something in his ancient eyes shifted. "I am going to withdraw my fleet." "Commander," the voice came from off-screen, one of Vexith's officers probably. "We cannot retreat. The High Council will." "The High Council is not here." Vexith did not look away from Chen. "I am, and I will not spend more lives learning lessons I already know." He paused. "You have won today, Admiral, not because you were stronger, because you were something we do not know how to fight." "Creative," Chen offered. "Unpredictable, insane, terrifying." Vexith's mandibles clicked slowly. "All of those things, and perhaps creative as well." He straightened in his chair. "We will meet again, Admiral. Perhaps next time we will be on the same side." "Perhaps," Chen agreed. "But only if your High Council learns the same lesson you did." "They will learn," Vexith's voice was certain. "Or they will die. Those are the only options when dealing with humans." The transmission ended. Moments later, the Dominion fleet began to pull back, 2,000 surviving ships retreating from 47. "No, 36 now." Chen closed her eyes and allowed herself one moment of grief. 11 ships, thousands of lives. The cost of creativity was paid in blood, just like any other cost. But her world was safe. Her people were alive. And somewhere out there, an alien commander was going to tell his superiors something they did not want to hear. Humans were not just another species to be conquered. They were something new, something dangerous. Something creative. 6 months passed after the Battle of New Haven. In that time, word spread across the Dominion Empire like fire through dry grass. Every commander who faced human forces returned with the same story. Numbers meant nothing. Superior weapons meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was whether you could imagine what the humans might do, and you never could. Commander Vexith stood before the High Council on the Dominion homeworld, facing 12 ancient beings who had ruled their species for centuries. They sat in a semicircle of floating thrones, their aged bodies supported by technology, while their minds remained sharp as blades. "You retreated," the first counselor said, his voice like grinding stone. "You had 2,000 ships remaining. The humans had 36. "Yes," Vexith replied simply. "And you believed this was the correct decision." "I know it was." Vexith stood straight, refusing to show fear. "Had I pressed the attack, I would have won eventually, but I would have lost another 1,000 ships, perhaps more, against an enemy that learns from every battle, that adapts faster than any species I have ever seen. Such losses are not acceptable. You speak of humans as if they are special. The second counselor leaned forward, his 4 eyes narrowing. They are mammals, short-lived, physically weak, technologically inferior. We have conquered thousands of species more impressive than them. With respect, counselor, you have conquered species that fight the way you expect them to fight. Vexith activated a holographic display showing recordings from the battle. Watch. The council watched as human ships scattered instead of forming lines. They watched a frigate use holographic projectors to create phantom fleets. They watched a destroyer ram an enemy cruiser rather than surrender. They watched humans do impossible things, over and over. This is the mining equipment they used as weapons at Kepler 9, Vexith continued, showing new images. These are the cargo ships they crashed into our formations. This is the station they flooded with their own atmosphere, killing themselves to kill our soldiers. He turned to face the council directly. These are not the actions of an inferior species. These are the actions of an enemy that will do anything to win. Then we will do anything to destroy them, the first counselor declared. We will send larger fleets, more ships, more soldiers. And they will find new ways to defeat them. Vexith's voice was patient but firm. You do not understand, counselors. We have fought humans with 10 times their numbers and lost. We have fought them with 50 times their numbers and barely won. What number will be enough? 100 times? 1,000? What are you suggesting? The third counselor spoke for the first time, her voice soft but carrying clearly. That we surrender to creatures who have fewer ships than a minor colony world. I am suggesting that we stop thinking of them as inferior. Vexith shut down the display. I am suggesting that we learn from them instead of trying to destroy them. Silence fell over the council chamber. The idea was so foreign, so against everything the Dominion believed, that the counselors seemed unable to process it. Learn from mammals. The second counselor's voice dripped with contempt. The Dominion has nothing to learn from any species. We are the masters of the galaxy. We were the masters of a galaxy that did not contain humans. Vexith took a deep breath. Now we share that galaxy with a species that thinks differently than anyone we have ever encountered. We can spend the next century trying to crush them, losing ships and soldiers in battles that should be easy but never are. Or we can accept that they offer something we lack. And what would that be? Creativity. Vexith said the word like it was sacred. The ability to see possibilities where others see walls. The willingness to try things that make no sense on the chance that they might work. The courage to fail and learn and fail again until success is achieved. These sound like weaknesses, the first counselor said. They sound like weaknesses to us, Vexith agreed. That is precisely why they work against us. We cannot predict what humans will do because their minds do not work like ours. We cannot counter their strategies because they have no strategies, only endless improvisation. Then how do you propose we defeat them? The third counselor's question was genuine, curious rather than confrontational. I propose we do not try. Vexith let the words hang in the air. I propose we make peace with them instead. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Counselors shouted over each other, their ancient composure forgotten. Vexith stood in the center of the storm, waiting for silence to return. Finally, the first counselor raised his hand, and the voices stopped. You speak of peace, he said slowly, but peace implies equality. The Dominion has never made peace with an inferior species. Then perhaps, Vexith said carefully, we should stop considering them inferior. On the human colony of New Haven, Admiral Chen was dealing with her own political problems. The victory had made her famous across Earth and its colonies. It had also made her enemies. You took unacceptable risks, Senator Morrison was saying, his face red with anger. You gambled with the lives of millions of colonists on tactics that should never have worked. Chen sat calmly in the hearing room, facing a panel of politicians who had never seen combat. Senator, everything in war is a gamble. The only question is whether the gamble pays off. And if it hadn't, if the enemy had pressed their attack, then we would have died. Chen's voice was matter of fact. But we would have died fighting, and every ship we destroyed, every soldier we killed, would have been one less threat to the next colony. That's barbaric. That's war. Chen leaned forward. Senator, I had 47 ships against 3,000. If I had fought the way you expected me to fight, I would have lasted perhaps an hour. Instead, I lasted until the enemy gave up. I saved millions of lives by doing things that made no sense, because the enemy expected me to make sense. The enemy retreated because they chose to. Another senator interjected. Not because you defeated them. They chose to retreat because they were losing, Chen corrected. Not in numbers, perhaps, but in morale, in confidence, in their belief that they could win. I broke their spirit without breaking their fleet, and that is a kind of victory no amount of firepower can achieve. The hearing continued for hours, but Chen knew the outcome didn't matter. She had proven something that the political class was only beginning to understand. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology or resources or population. It was the ability to think differently. 3 months later, an unexpected message reached Earth. A Dominion diplomat was requesting permission to discuss terms of peace. Chen was present when the diplomat arrived, standing with other military leaders as the alien craft landed at the United Earth Reception Facility. The ship was sleek and beautiful, utterly different from the warships she had fought. The diplomat who emerged was not what she expected. He was old by Dominion standards, his exoskeleton showing the cracks and discoloration of advanced age. His 4 eyes were clouded but still sharp. Admiral Chen, he said, and his voice was familiar. It is interesting to meet you in person. Commander Vexith, Chen inclined her head. I thought you were a military officer. I was. Now I am whatever my people need me to be. Vexith's mandibles clicked in what might have been a smile. The High Council was not pleased with my recommendations. They sent me here partly as an insult. And partly because I am the only commander who has faced humans and lived to learn from it. Vexith looked around at the gathered humans, studying them with obvious curiosity. My people believe you are inferior, short-lived, emotional, illogical. They think your victory at New Haven was luck. And what do you think? Vexith was silent for a long moment. I think, he said finally, that you are the most dangerous species we have ever encountered, not because you are strong, but because you are creative. You see the universe differently than we do. You find solutions we cannot imagine to problems we thought were unsolvable. He paused. And I think that makes you either our greatest enemy or our greatest potential ally. Which would you prefer? Chen asked. I would prefer to never fight your kind again. Vexith's voice was sincere. The Battle of New Haven taught me many things, Admiral, but the most important lesson was this. There is no mathematics that can account for human creativity. It cannot be measured or predicted or defended against. It can only be respected. Chen smiled slightly. That's a good start. It is only a start, Vexith agreed. I do not know if my people can truly accept humans as equals. 10,000 years of superiority is not easily forgotten. But I know that the alternative, an endless war against an enemy that refuses to fight by our rules, is not acceptable either. Then let's talk about alternatives. Chen gestured toward the conference building. I have a feeling these negotiations are going to be very interesting. As they walked together, human and alien, enemies who might become allies, Vexith spoke again. May I ask you something, Admiral? Something that has troubled me since our battle. Go ahead. That pilot, the one who flew her ship into my carrier, you said she was a mother. Vexith's voice was hesitant, uncertain. How could she do that? How could she sacrifice herself so completely? Chen was quiet for a moment, remembering Lieutenant Jackson's face, her smile, the last words she had spoken over the radio. Because she loved her children more than she feared death, she said finally. Because she knew that if she didn't stop you there, you would eventually reach Earth. And because humans will do anything, to protect the people we love. Vexith considered this. We do not have a word for that in our language. Neither do we, really. Chen smiled sadly. We just call it being human. The peace negotiations lasted 3 years. They were the most difficult, frustrating, and ultimately rewarding 3 years in human diplomatic history. Commander Vexith, now Ambassador Vexith, fought every day to convince his own government that humans were worth treating as equals. Admiral Chen, now Special Envoy Chen, fought equally hard to convince humanity that peace was worth the compromises it required. The final treaty was signed on a space station built specifically for the purpose, orbiting a neutral world that neither species had any claim to. The document was hundreds of pages long, covering everything from trade agreements to military limitations to cultural exchange programs. But the most important part of the treaty was the simplest. It was a single sentence, added at Vexith's insistence. The Dominion formally recognizes human creativity as a strategic asset of equal value to military strength. Chen had laughed when she first read it. Vexith had not understood why. You've turned our greatest weapon into a treaty clause, she explained. The politicians back home will love it. They can point to that sentence and say, we won something concrete. You did win something concrete, Vexith replied. You won survival, you won recognition, you won peace. We won because you were wise enough to see what your leaders couldn't. Chen's voice was sincere. Not many commanders would have retreated from a battle they were winning. Fewer still would have advocated for peace with an enemy they despised. I never despised humans. Vexith's 4 eyes met her too. I feared you, that is very different. And now I fear what humans and Dominion together might accomplish. His mandibles clicked in his version of a smile. The galaxy is not prepared for that alliance. The years that followed proved him right. Human creativity, combined with Dominion resources and technology, produced innovations that transformed interstellar civilization. New ship designs that were more efficient than anything either species had built alone. Medical treatments that extended both human and Dominion lifespans. Agricultural techniques that ended food shortages on 100 worlds. But the most significant change was cultural. Young Dominion officers began studying human history, fascinated by a species that had spent most of its existence at war with itself. They learned about human generals who had won battles through deception and surprise, about inventors who had changed the world by asking, what if, instead of why. And they learned to ask those questions themselves. You have corrupted our youth, a Dominion elder complained to Vexith during a diplomatic reception. They think like humans now. They question everything, challenge everything. They think for themselves, Vexith corrected. They see possibilities instead of limitations. If that is corruption, then let us be corrupted. The elder was not convinced, but it did not matter. The change was already happening, spreading through Dominion society like a virus. A good virus, Vexith thought, a virus of creativity. On Earth, similar changes were taking place. Humans learned from the Dominion as well, learned patience, learned planning, learned the value of thinking in centuries rather than years. The combination of human innovation and Dominion stability created something new, something neither species could have achieved alone. Admiral Chen retired from military service and took a position as head of the Human Dominion Cultural Exchange Institute. She spent her final years traveling between worlds, watching the two species slowly learn to understand each other. Vexith visited her often. They had become friends, these two former enemies, bound by the strange circumstances that had brought them together. "Do you regret it?" Chen asked him once, during one of his visits to Earth. They were sitting on the porch of her home, watching the sun set over an ocean that had once been polluted beyond recovery and was now clean and teeming with life. Human creativity and Dominion technology working together. "Regret what?" "Retreating, making peace, spending your final years as a diplomat instead of a warrior." Vexith was silent for a long moment. "I regret the 600 ships I lost at New Haven," he said finally. "I regret the soldiers who died because I was too proud to retreat sooner. I regret the years we spent fighting when we could have been building." He turned to look at her. "But I do not regret recognizing what humans are. I do not regret choosing wisdom over pride. Even though your people still see you as a coward." "Some of them do." Vexith's voice was calm. "Others see me as a visionary. The difference depends on whether they have learned to see humans as I have." He paused. "History will judge which view was correct. I am confident in the verdict." Chen smiled. "You've become very philosophical in your old age." "I have become very human in my old age." Vexith's mandibles clicked with amusement. "Perhaps your creativity is contagious." "Perhaps it is." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Dominion and human ships flew together on missions of exploration and discovery. Somewhere out there, young officers of both species were learning to think in ways their ancestors never had. And somewhere, in the historical records of both civilizations, the Battle of New Haven was recorded as the turning point. The moment when the galaxy learned that victory was not measured in numbers or weapons, but in the ability to imagine the impossible and make it real. The Dominion had learned to fear human creativity, and in learning to fear it, they had learned to respect it, and in learning to respect it, they had learned to embrace it. That was humanity's true victory. Not the battle itself, but what came after. Not the weapons they used, but the weapons they no longer needed. Chen closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on her face. She thought of Lieutenant Jackson, who had sacrificed herself so that this moment could exist. She thought of all the men and women who had fought and died at New Haven, their creativity and courage making possible a peace they would never see. "We did good work," she said quietly. "We did necessary work," Vexith corrected. "Good work and necessary work are not always the same thing." "This time they were." Vexith considered this, then nodded slowly. "This time, yes, they were." The sun finished setting, and the stars came out in full glory. Human stars and Dominion stars, shining together in a galaxy that had learned at last that some victories were too important to be won with weapons alone. In the years that followed, the Human-Dominion alliance grew stronger. Other species joined, drawn by the promise of partnership rather than conquest. The Dominion's old way of expansion through force gave way to a new approach. Expansion through cooperation, through shared creativity, through the recognition that every species had something valuable to offer. It was not perfect. Nothing built by living beings ever is. There were still conflicts, still misunderstandings, still moments when the old fears resurfaced and threatened to tear everything apart. But there was also hope. There was a future. There was a galaxy that had learned to value creativity over strength, cooperation over conquest, wisdom over pride. And at the center of it all was a simple truth that Admiral Chen had demonstrated at New Haven, and Ambassador Vexith had recognized in the aftermath. Numbers did not matter. Weapons did not matter. What mattered was the willingness to imagine something different, something better, something impossible. What mattered was being human. Or, as Vexith had learned to say, being creative. It was the same thing, really. And it was enough. 50 years after the Treaty of New Haven was signed, a ceremony was held at the site of the original battle. Ships from a dozen species gathered around the blue and green world that had once been the focal point of a war that could have destroyed both humans and Dominion. The ceremony was to dedicate a memorial, a massive structure floating in space, visible from the planet's surface. It was shaped like two hands clasped together, one human and one Dominion, crafted from the hulls of ships that had fought in the original battle. Ambassador Vexith was there, impossibly old now, his exoskeleton more metal than organic, his eyes clouded but still aware. He had refused to die before this moment, had fought against the failing of his ancient body with the same determination that had once made him a great commander. Admiral Chen had died 5 years earlier, peacefully, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had grown up in a galaxy at peace. Her great-granddaughter, Captain Maya Chen, represented the family at the ceremony. Maya was young, barely 30 by human standards, but she had already made a name for herself. She commanded one of the new hybrid ships, crewed by both humans and Dominion, exploring the far edges of known space. She had inherited her great-grandmother's creativity and her great-grandmother's courage. "Ambassador," she said, approaching Vexith where he sat in his hover chair, "thank you for being here." "I could not miss this." Vexith's voice was weak but clear. "This is the completion of everything I have worked for, the proof that New Haven was not just a battle but a beginning." Maya looked out at the gathered ships, Dominion warships and human cruisers, vessels from the insectoid Crick and the silicon-based Founders, even a few of the mysterious Weavers who had only recently made contact. All of them were here to honor a battle that had changed the galaxy. "My great-grandmother used to tell me about you," she said. "She said you were the bravest person she ever met." Vexith's mandibles clicked weakly. "Brave? I retreated from a battle I was winning." "That's why she said it," Maya smiled. "She said it takes more courage to stop fighting than to keep going, more courage to admit you're wrong than to pretend you're right, more courage to choose peace than to choose victory. Your great-grandmother was a wise human. She learned from a wise Dominion." Vexith made a sound that might have been laughter or might have been a cough. "We learned from each other. That was the point. That was always the point." The ceremony began. Speeches were given in a dozen languages, translated instantaneously by devices that had not existed 50 years ago. The history of the battle was recounted, not as a conflict between enemies, but as the moment when two civilizations learned to see each other clearly. When it was Vexith's turn to speak, he was helped to a platform that faced the gathered ships. His voice was amplified so that every being present could hear him. "50 years ago," he said, "I came to this world with 3,000 ships intending to conquer it. I believed that numbers were all that mattered. I believed that superior force would always triumph." He paused, gathering his strength. "I was wrong." The silence was absolute. Every being in the system was listening. "Admiral Sarah Chen taught me that creativity is more powerful than strength, that imagination is more dangerous than weapons, that the willingness to do the impossible is the most formidable trait any species can possess." Vexith's eyes found Maya in the crowd. "She did not teach me this with words. She taught me by demonstrating it, by showing me that 47 ships could defeat 3,000 if the 47 were crewed by beings who refused to accept defeat." He looked up at the memorial, the two hands clasped in eternal friendship. "Today, we do not celebrate a human victory or a Dominion defeat. We celebrate a moment of understanding, a moment when two species looked at each other and saw not enemies but potential allies, potential friends." His voice grew stronger with emotion. "We celebrate the beginning of something that has transformed the galaxy, something that could not have been built by Dominion alone or by humans alone, but only by both working together." Vexith raised one aged arm, pointing at the gathered fleet. "Look at what we have built. Ships that combine human innovation and Dominion engineering, crews that include a dozen species working as one, an alliance that has brought peace to systems that knew only war for millennia." His arm fell. "This is what creativity can accomplish, Not destruction but creation, not conquest but cooperation, not fear but hope. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried clearly through the amplification. Admiral Chen once told me that humans will do anything to protect the people they love. I have learned that this is true of all species if they are given the chance to love instead of hate, to trust instead of fear, to build instead of destroy. He closed his eyes. I loved my people enough to tell them they were wrong. Admiral Chen loved her people enough to fight for a future she would never see. Together, we loved the galaxy enough to give it a chance. When he finished speaking, there was no applause. Applause would have been too small for what had been said. Instead, every ship in the fleet activated its running lights simultaneously, creating a display of color and brilliance that illuminated the entire system. It was a salute, a thank you, a promise that what had been started at New Haven would never be forgotten. Vexith watched the lights with tears in his ancient eyes. Dominion did not cry, their biology did not allow it, but they had learned the expression from humans, and he understood what it meant. Maya approached him after the ceremony, when the crowds had begun to disperse, and the ships had started returning to their duties. "That was beautiful," she said simply. It was true. Vexith looked at her with eyes that had seen more than any human could imagine. The galaxy fears human creativity. It has always feared it, but fear is not the only response to things we do not understand. We can also embrace them, learn from them, become better because of them. Is that your final lesson, Ambassador? Vexith was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, really smiled, a human expression that he had learned to make with his alien face. My final lesson is this: never underestimate a species that refuses to believe in impossible. Humans taught me that. I taught it to my people. Now I teach it to you. He reached out and touched her hand with his aged claw. Go out into the galaxy, Captain Chen. Explore, discover, create. Be everything your great-grandmother believed humanity could be. I will, Maya promised. I know you will. Vexith closed his eyes. I know you will. He died 3 days later peacefully, his work complete. He was given a funeral with full honors from both species, the first Dominion ever to be honored so by humanity. His body was laid to rest on New Haven, in a tomb beside the memorial, where he could watch over the world he had tried to conquer and ended up saving. The inscription on his tomb was simple, written in both human and Dominion script. He learned to fear human creativity, then he learned to love it. And beneath that, in smaller letters, the galaxy is bigger than our fears. It was enough, it was everything. And far above, the stars continued to shine, watching over a universe where two species had learned that the greatest victories were not won with weapons, but with wisdom. Not with strength, but with creativity. Not with fear, but with hope. Human hope, Dominion wisdom, galactic creativity. Together, they had changed everything. Together, they would continue to change everything. Forever.